In the modern world, millions of people search for love through their phones. Dating apps have changed the way relationships begin. With just a few swipes, strangers can connect from different cities, different countries, and even different continents. For many people, these apps offer hope. Hope for love. Hope for companionship. Hope for meeting someone who might change their life forever. But in rare and disturbing cases, these platforms also become tools for manipulation. Behind a friendly profile picture and charming messages, someone with very different intentions may be waiting. And one of the most shocking examples of this kind of deception became known around the world as the story of the Tinder Swindler. The man at the center of this story was born in Israel in 1990. His real name was Shimon Hayut. From an early age, people around him noticed something unusual about him. He was charismatic, confident, and extremely persuasive. He had the ability to convince people very quickly. But instead of using that talent for something positive, Shimon used it for deception. As a teenager, he was already involved in small scams. According to reports, he stole checks from families he worked for and attempted to cash them for money. At first, these crimes were small, but they revealed something important about his personality. Shimon was willing to lie and manipulate others if it meant gaining money or status. Eventually, his actions began attracting attention from authorities in Israel. By the time he was in his early 20s, Shimon had already been accused of fraud multiple times. Facing legal trouble, he made a decision that would change the course of his life. He left Israel. But leaving the country did not mean leaving crime behind. In fact, it allowed him to create something far more dangerous. A completely new identity, a new name, a new life. Somewhere in Europe, Shimon Hayut reinvented himself. He began calling himself Simon Leviev. The name sounded powerful, wealthy, connected. But what made the name truly convincing was something else. Simon claimed to be the son of Lev Leviev. Lev Leviev was a real person, a billionaire diamond businessman known internationally as the King of Diamonds. Lev Leviev owned a massive diamond empire that operated across multiple countries. His wealth and influence were widely known in the business world. By claiming to be his son, Simon instantly gave himself a powerful identity. To strangers who heard his name, it sounded believable. After all, the diamond industry was global. Most people had no way of confirming whether the claim was true. Simon carefully built the illusion. He dressed in expensive designer clothing. He stayed in luxury hotels. He traveled constantly between cities like London, Paris, Amsterdam, and Rome. He posted photos on social media showing a glamorous lifestyle. Private jets, five-star restaurants, luxury cars, high-end watches. Everything about his life appeared wealthy and successful. But there was a secret behind this image. Simon was not a billionaire's son. He had no connection to the Leviev diamond family. And the luxurious lifestyle he displayed online was not funded by family wealth. It was funded by the people he was deceiving. Simon began using the dating app Tinder as his main hunting ground. On Tinder, his profile looked impressive. Photos showed him sitting inside private jets, dining at exclusive restaurants, attending business meetings in expensive suits. His bio described him as a businessman working in the international diamond trade. For many women using the app, his profile stood out immediately. He seemed exciting, sophisticated, and incredibly wealthy. One of the women who matched with him was a Norwegian woman named Cece was living in London at the time. She worked hard, had a stable job, and like many people, she was simply hoping to meet someone interesting. When Simon matched with her on Tinder, the conversation started quickly. He was charming, funny, attentive. Within hours, they were exchanging messages constantly. Simon asked about her life, her work, her dreams. He made her feel important, special. Within a short time, Simon suggested something surprising. Instead of a normal dinner date, he invited Cece to travel with him. He told her he needed to fly to Bulgaria for business, and he asked if she would like to join him on the trip. For most people, such an invitation from someone they had just met would seem suspicious. But Simon made everything appear legitimate. He sent photos. He shared videos. And when Cece arrived at the airport, she saw something that made the entire situation feel real. A private jet, waiting on the runway. Inside the jet were several people. A man who appeared to be Simon's bodyguard. Another man who looked like a business associate. Everything about the scene looked authentic. To Cece, it seemed like she had stepped into the life of someone extremely wealthy. The flight to Bulgaria felt like something from a movie. Champagne, luxury seats, friendly conversation. Simon treated her with attention and affection. For Cece, the experience was unforgettable. After the trip, their relationship grew closer. Simon called her frequently. He sent loving messages. He told her he wanted to build a future with her. But after some time, Simon began introducing a new story into their conversations. He told Cecily that his business had enemies, powerful enemies. According to him, these people were dangerous. They were threatening him and his team. Because of this situation, Simon claimed that he could not use his own credit cards. He said his accounts were being monitored by these enemies. If he used his cards, they might track his location. Simon explained that he needed help, temporary help. He asked Cecily if she could take out credit cards and loans in her own name so he could continue traveling safely. He promised that he would repay everything quickly. After all, he was a billionaire's son. Money was not a problem. At first, Cecily hesitated. But Simon had spent weeks building trust. He had shown her luxury. He had introduced her to people who appeared to be part of his team. Everything seemed real. Eventually, she agreed to help. She opened credit cards. She transferred money. At first, the amounts were small. But over time, the requests became larger and larger. Soon, Cecily had taken out multiple loans. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. All of it sent to Simon. What she did not know was that Simon was repeating the exact same story with other women at the same time. Money from one victim was used to impress the next. Flights, hotels, luxury dinners, designer clothes. Everything was paid for by the people he was deceiving. Simon had created a system, a cycle, a financial pyramid built entirely on lies. And for a long time, the system worked perfectly. Until the day the women he had manipulated finally began discovering the truth. After Cecily Gelhoy had sent Simon Leviev hundreds of thousands of dollars, she believed she was helping the man she loved during a dangerous crisis. Simon continued telling her frightening stories. He claimed that powerful enemies were still following him. Sometimes he sent Cecily photos that appeared to show his bodyguard injured. In one image, a man with a bandaged head could be seen lying in a hospital bed. Simon said the attack had been carried out by the same enemies who were trying to destroy him. Each time Cecily saw these images, her fear grew stronger. And the more frightened she became, the more willing she was to help him. Simon constantly reassured her that everything would be temporary. He promised that once the danger passed, he would repay every dollar. In fact, he told her something even more exciting. He said they would soon start their life together. A future filled with luxury and travel. For Cecily, the situation felt stressful but hopeful. She believed she was supporting the man she loved during a difficult time. But slowly, the financial pressure began to overwhelm her. The loans and credit cards she had opened were growing out of control. Banks began contacting her about payments. Debt collectors called her phone. The situation was becoming impossible to manage. Eventually, Cecily decided to confront Simon. She asked him when he would finally repay the money. Simon responded with the same explanation. His accounts were still frozen. His enemies were still watching. He just needed a little more time. And sometimes a little more money. At this point, Cecily had already sent Simon around $250,000. But Simon had no intention of stopping. While Cecily struggled with debt, Simon was living a life of luxury. He stayed in expensive hotels. He flew across Europe. He wore designer clothing and posted glamorous photos online. And Cecily was not the only woman supporting that lifestyle. At the same time Simon was manipulating Cecily, he had already begun targeting other victims. One of those victims was a woman named Pernilla Sjöholm from Sweden. Pernilla also met Simon through Tinder. Just like Cecily, she was impressed by his profile. Luxury travel, private jets, expensive restaurants. Simon seemed like someone living an extraordinary life. When they first met in person, Simon treated Pernilla with generosity. They traveled together. They ate at expensive restaurants. They stayed in luxury hotels. But unlike Cecily, Simon did not present the relationship to Pernilla as romantic. Instead, he told her he wanted to be close friends. This was another part of his strategy. By building different types of relationships with different women, Simon created multiple sources of financial support. Some women believed they were in romantic relationships with him. Others believed they were helping a wealthy friend facing danger. Either way, the result was the same. They trusted him. And eventually he asked them for money. Simon told Pernilla the same story he had told Cecily. Dangerous enemies, frozen bank accounts, temporary financial trouble. And just like Cecily, Pernilla believed him. She also began sending him money. By this time, Simon had perfected his method. First, he impressed his victims with luxury, private flights, expensive gifts, 5-star hotels. He made them believe he was incredibly wealthy. Then he created a crisis, a dangerous situation involving enemies and security threats. Finally, he asked for help. Because the victims believed he was rich, they had no reason to doubt that he would repay them later. But Simon never repaid anyone. Instead, he moved constantly from country to country. When one victim began asking questions, he focused his attention on another. The money flowed in a continuous cycle. One woman's loans funded another woman's luxury experience. It was a financial illusion. A pyramid built entirely on deception. Eventually, Cecily reached a breaking point. The debt had grown too large. She was receiving constant calls from banks demanding payment. She realized she needed answers. Determined to find the truth, Cecily began investigating Simon's identity. She searched for information about the Leviev family. She tried to confirm his connection to the Diamond Empire. What she discovered shocked her. Simon Leviev was not the son of Lev Leviev. In fact, the Leviev family had publicly stated that they had no connection to him at all. He was not a billionaire's son. He was not part of the diamond industry. Everything he had told her was a lie. Cecily felt devastated. She had trusted him completely. She had risked her financial future to help him. And now she realized she had been manipulated. But the most shocking discovery came next. Cecily learned that she was not the only victim. There were other women. Women who had also sent Simon money. Women who had believed the same story. When Cecily finally connected with Pernilla Sjöholm, the truth became undeniable. They had both been deceived by the same man. They had both sent him large amounts of money. And they were both now facing serious financial consequences. Instead of remaining silent, Cecily and Pernilla made a bold decision. They decided to fight back. Together. They began contacting journalists. They shared documents, messages, and evidence showing how Simon had manipulated them. Their story eventually reached a Norwegian newspaper called VG. Investigative reporters began examining the case. They reviewed financial records. They analyzed messages between Simon and his victims. And they uncovered the full scale of the fraud. Simon Leviev had been running the same scam across multiple countries. Norway, Sweden, the United Kingdom, and beyond. Some victims had lost tens of thousands of dollars. Others had lost hundreds of thousands. Altogether, the total amount of money involved was estimated to be several $million. The journalists published a major investigation exposing Simon's true identity. Suddenly, the man who had lived like a billionaire was being exposed as a fraud. News outlets across Europe began covering the story. Police in several countries opened investigations. For the first time, Simon Leviev's carefully constructed world was beginning to collapse. But even then, he was not finished running. And the man who had spent years manipulating women through a dating app was about to become one of the most famous international fraudsters in modern history. When the investigation by the Norwegian newspaper VG was finally published, the story spread quickly across Europe. For years, Simon Leviev had managed to stay hidden behind luxury hotels, private jets, and carefully crafted lies. But now the truth about his identity was becoming public. The investigation revealed that Simon Leviev was not the son of a billionaire diamond tycoon. His real name was Shimon Hayut, and he had been running elaborate fraud schemes for years. The article described how he used dating apps like Tinder to target women across multiple countries. It explained how he built trust, created a fake identity, and then convinced his victims to send him large amounts of money. The story immediately caught international attention. People were shocked by the scale of the deception. For many readers, it was difficult to understand how one man could manipulate so many people so successfully. But those who studied the case closely began to see the pattern. Simon had carefully studied human psychology. He knew how to create excitement. He knew how to build emotional connections. And most importantly, he knew how to make his victims feel responsible for helping him. The illusion of wealth was the foundation of his entire scheme. Once a victim believed he was rich, there was no reason to doubt that he could repay any money later. But after the article was published, Simon's lifestyle began to change. Hotels that once welcomed him began refusing his reservations. Some of his former associates distanced themselves. And authorities in several countries started looking for him. But Simon had always been good at disappearing. Before the investigation could fully catch up with him, he fled again. Eventually, authorities discovered that Simon had returned to Israel. But his legal situation there was complicated. Although he had committed fraud in multiple European countries, the crimes had not been prosecuted in Israel at that time. For a while, it seemed possible that Simon might escape serious consequences once again. Meanwhile, Cecilia and Pernilla were still dealing with the aftermath of the scam. Both women had enormous debts. Banks demanded payment for loans and credit cards taken out in their names. Debt collectors called constantly. In many ways, the victims continued suffering long after Simon had moved on. But the public exposure of the story changed something important. Instead of feeling ashamed or silent, the victims began speaking openly about what had happened. They wanted people to understand that anyone could fall victim to manipulation. Simon had not simply asked for money. He had built relationships. He had created trust. He had made his victims believe they were helping someone they loved. Eventually, the international attention surrounding the case led to further legal action. In 2019, Israeli authorities arrested Shimon Hayut. He was charged with fraud related to earlier crimes committed in Israel before he left the country. Although those charges were not directly connected to the Tinder scams in Europe, they finally brought him into custody. Later that year, he was sentenced to 15 months in prison. For the victims, the sentence felt far too short compared to the damage he had caused. By that point, Simon had stolen millions of dollars from multiple women. Many victims were still struggling to repay their debts. But the legal system had limitations. Because the crimes had taken place in different countries, prosecuting them all together was extremely difficult. In the end, Simon served only about 5 months in prison before being released early for good behavior. When he walked out of prison, many people were shocked. The man who had built a life of luxury through deception was free again. And incredibly, he returned to social media almost immediately. Photos began appearing online showing him traveling again, wearing designer clothing, staying in expensive hotels. The same lifestyle that had once been funded by his victims appeared to continue. For many people following the story, this was deeply frustrating. But something else was happening at the same time. The victims were refusing to disappear. Cecilia Gelhoy, Pernilla Sioholm, and other women began working together to tell their story publicly. They gave interviews. They spoke with journalists. They explained how the manipulation had worked. Their goal was not only to expose Simon. They also wanted to warn others about the dangers of online deception. Their story eventually reached filmmakers and producers. In 2022, Netflix released a documentary called The Tinder Swindler. The film told the story of Simon Leviev and the women he had deceived. It included interviews with Cecilia, Pernilla, and other victims. The documentary quickly became one of the most watched true crime films on the platform. Millions of people around the world watched the story unfold. For the first time, the full scale of Simon's scheme became widely known. Viewers saw how carefully he had constructed his false identity. They saw the emotional impact his deception had on the victims. And they saw how the victims eventually turned the situation around by exposing him. One of the most powerful parts of the story was how the women chose to respond. Instead of hiding in shame, they decided to confront the man who had manipulated them. They worked with journalists, they shared evidence, and they helped reveal the truth to the world. Their courage turned a story of deception into a story of resistance. Today, the name Simon Leviev remains widely associated with one of the most famous romance fraud cases in modern history. His story became a warning about the darker side of online relationships. In a world where people can present any identity they choose on social media, trust can sometimes be dangerous. The Tinder Swindler case showed how easily someone could create an illusion of wealth and power. It also showed how quickly that illusion could collapse once the truth came out. For the victims, the emotional and financial consequences were real and long-lasting. But by speaking out, they ensured that millions of people learned from their experience. Their story reminds us that behind every online profile, every message, and every glamorous photo, there may be a reality that looks very different from the image being presented. And sometimes, the person who appears to be living the perfect life is hiding the biggest lie of all.